The elevator at the Hotel Theresa wasn't just a way to get to the 7th floor. On the night of December 4th, 1952, it was a mahogany coffin moving at 3 feet per second. Harlem, 2:14 in the morning. The lobby of the Theresa, the Waldorf of Harlem, was usually a sanctuary. It was a cathedral of marble and brass where the black elite came to see and be seen. But at this hour, the lobby was empty. The bellhops had retreated to the back room. The front desk clerk was dozing over a racing form. The only sound was the relentless drumming of rain against the revolving glass doors on 125th Street. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson stood waiting for the car. He was alone. He was wearing a cashmere overcoat that cost more than a factory worker's annual salary, and his fedora was tilted at the precise angle of a man who owned the pavement beneath his feet. He had just finished a poker game in Suite 402. He was tired. His guard was down. Or so they thought. Bumpy stepped into the box. Pressed the button. He watched the brass gate begin to slide shut, but before the metal lips could kiss, a hand shot out. A leather glove blocked the door. The safety mechanism kicked in, and the doors shuddered open again. Bumpy didn't flinch. He just watched. 5 men stepped into the lobby from the shadows of the mezzanine. They moved fast, but not running. It was the hurried, stiff-legged walk of men carrying heavy iron in their waistbands. They didn't look like guests. They didn't have luggage. They wore fedoras pulled low, and their coats were buttoned tight despite the humidity of the lobby. They crowded into the elevator. The physics of the space changed instantly. The elevator was designed for 4 comfortably. With 6, it was a cage. The air instantly grew hot, thick with the smell of wet wool, stale tobacco, and the acrid metallic stench of nervous sweat. Bumpy Johnson was pressed against the back mahogany panel. He couldn't move his arms. He couldn't reach the switchblade in his ankle holster. He couldn't reach the .38 in his shoulder rig. He was pinned. The 5 men didn't look at him. They stared straight ahead at the brass doors. But Bumpy looked at them. He analyzed them with the cold precision of a grandmaster assessing a board. He saw the way the man on the left kept tapping his right pocket. He saw the scar on the neck of the man in front, a knife wound from a Brooklyn brawl. He saw the cheap Italian shoes that were scuffed at the toe. These weren't robbers. Robbers ask for your wallet. These men were hitmen, and they weren't waiting for the penthouse. The doors finally slid shut. The latch clicked. The car lurched upward. The hum of the electric motor filled the silence. Bumpy's eyes shifted to the control panel. The man nearest the buttons reached out. He didn't press a floor. He flipped the emergency stop switch. The elevator shuddered to a halt between the 3rd and 4th floors. The hum of the motor died. The silence that rushed into that box was deafening. It was the silence of a held breath before the scream. Bumpy Johnson realized the math in a fraction of a second. 5 against 1, no exit, no witnesses, a steel box hanging in a shaft, suspended in the dark. The man in the front turned around. He smiled. It was a wolf smile, all teeth and no joy. He reached into his coat. He whispered, "End of the line, Professor." The hitman made a fatal mistake. He thought Bumpy Johnson was a businessman. He thought Bumpy was a gambler. He forgot that before Bumpy was a king, he was a gladiator. Bumpy didn't wait for the gun to clear the holster. He didn't wait for the speech. The light flickered. The voltage dropped. For a split second, the car was plunged into total darkness, and in that darkness, the professor went to work. 50 seconds. That is the timestamp on the police report based on the stop log. 50 seconds of darkness inside a 6x6 box. 50 seconds is an eternity in a fight. Try holding your breath for 50 seconds. Now, imagine doing it while fighting for your life against 5 armed men in a closet. We don't see the fight. We hear it. We hear the wet thud of an elbow smashing into a windpipe. We hear the sickening crack of a knee being driven into a groin. We hear the frantic shuffling of leather soles on wood as 5 men realize they are trapped in a closet with a demon. We hear a muffled gunshot that goes wide, ricocheting off the steel ceiling with a deafening ping. There were screams, but they were short, cut off by the sounds of crushing impact. When the tungsten bulb flickered back to life, the elevator was no longer a cage. It was a slaughterhouse. 5 men lay on the floor. They were a tangle of broken limbs, unconscious bodies, and shattered pride. One was groaning, clutching a broken nose. Another was out cold, his jaw unhinged. The man who had touched the stop switch was slumped in the corner, his own gun lying uselessly 3 feet away, and standing in the center of the carnage, his chest heaving, a smear of blood on his cheek that wasn't his, was Bumpy Johnson. He adjusted his tie. He smoothed the lapels of his cashmere coat. He checked his cufflinks to make sure the mother of pearl hadn't cracked. He reached out and flipped the switch back to run. The car lurched into motion again. It rose smoothly. Ding! The doors opened on the penthouse floor. Bumpy walked out into the hallway. He nodded to the cleaning lady who was pushing her cart down the hall. She looked at him, then looked past him into the elevator. She screamed. Bumpy didn't stop. He walked to his suite, unlocked the door, and poured himself a brandy. They had trapped him in a box. They thought they had the advantage of numbers. They forgot the first rule of the Harlem underworld. When you lock a beast in a cage, you haven't trapped him. You've just ensured that you can't get away from him. That 50-second ride is the stuff of legend. But how does one man survive 5 killers in a phone booth without firing a shot? Like this video if you believe that Bumpy Johnson wasn't just a gangster, he was a force of nature. And subscribe as we open the file on the night the elevator ran red. To understand how a man survives 50 seconds in hell, you have to understand the fire that forged him. Harlem in 1952 wasn't just a neighborhood, it was an empire. And Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson sat on the throne. While the rest of America was segregated by law, Harlem was segregated by choice. It was a fortress of black culture, black money, and black power. The banks downtown wouldn't lend to 125th Street, so Harlem built its own bank, the numbers game. The policy racket wasn't just gambling. It was the economic engine of the community. It turned nickels and dimes into millions. It paid for surgeries, college tuitions, and business loans. It was the lifeblood of a people who had been locked out of the American dream, so they decided to build their own dream uptown. And the man who kept the books balanced, the man who ensured the runners didn't steal and the police didn't overreach, was Bumpy. They called him the Professor because he read Nietzsche and played chess at a grandmaster level. They called him Bumpy because of the knot on the back of his head. But to his enemies, he was simply the problem. Bumpy wasn't a thug. Thugs rely on muscle. Thugs have to scream to be heard. Bumpy relied on intellect, backed by the absolute willingness to use extreme violence when the logic ran out. He operated like a CEO. He had a payroll that included judges, captains of the NYPD, and city councilmen. He walked the line between criminal and community leader with a terrifying balance. He walked down 125th Street with the casual grace of a man walking through his own living room. The pavement was wet, reflecting the kaleidoscope of the Apollo Theater marquee. He knew the name of every shopkeeper, every runner, every hustler. He wasn't surrounded by guards. He didn't need them. The street was his guard. One afternoon, the status quo was tested, not by the Italians, but by a parasite within the system. A new numbers runner named Slick, a boy with more ambition than sense, decided to hold back a payout from Mrs. Agatha, a grandmother who had played the number 412 faithfully for 20 years. Slick was loud. He was flashing a new pistol tucked into his waistband. He felt invincible standing on the corner of Lenox Avenue, telling an old woman that her slip had been lost. Bumpy didn't shout. He didn't draw a weapon. He walked up to Slick and placed a hand on his shoulder. The crowd that had gathered went silent. The air grew heavy. He asked Slick if he knew how a suspension bridge worked. Slick looked confused, sweat beading on his forehead as he stared into Bumpy's calm eyes. Bumpy explained softly that a bridge only holds weight because every cable does its job. If one cable snaps, the bridge falls. He told Slick, "You are snapping my cable." Slick tried to bluster. He tried to reach for his waistband. Bumpy moved so fast it was a blur. He grabbed Slick's hand, twisting the fingers back until the bone snapped with a sound like a dry branch stepping on a forest floor. He took the roll of cash from Slick's pocket, counted out Mrs. Agatha's winnings down to the penny, and handed it to her with a bow. He looked at Slick, who was clutching his broken hand and sobbing on the sidewalk, and said, "Next time, I break the hand that feeds you." That was the king, benevolent to the sheep, ruthless to the wolves, but heavy is the head that wears the fedora. By late 1952, the sharks were circling. The Italian families downtown, specifically the Genovese crew led by Lucky Luciano's successors, were tired of paying a black tax to operate in Harlem. They wanted the heroin trade. They wanted the numbers. They looked at Harlem and saw a gold mine guarded by one man. Bumpy saw them coming. He prepared for war in the streets. He prepared for drive-by shootings and car bombs. He fortified his stash houses and armed his lieutenants. But he made one miscalculation. He assumed the attack would come from the outside. He assumed the enemy would come marching across 110th Street. He didn't realize that when you have $5 million on the street, the danger doesn't knock on the front door. Sometimes it waits for you in the lobby of your own hotel. To understand the isolation of that elevator car, you have to understand the man who wasn't there. A king never walks alone. That is the first rule of survival. For 10 years, wherever Bumpy Johnson walked, a shadow walked with him. His name was Silas the Wall Green. Silas was 6'5", built like a dock worker, with knuckles the size of walnuts and a loyalty that was supposed to be bulletproof. Silas wasn't just an employee. He was family. He sat at Bumpy's dinner table on Sunday afternoons, passing the cornbread and laughing at Bumpy's jokes even when they weren't funny. He held Bumpy's coat while the boss played chess at the Blue Note. He tasted Bumpy's food before the boss took a bite. They had come up together in the hard years, back when they were fighting with jagged bottles in the alleys of Charleston. They shared the kind of bond that is forged in poverty and cemented in blood. In the quiet hours at the Lenox Lounge, when the whiskey was poured and the guard was down, Bumpy would look at Silas and see a reflection of his own survival. Silas was the shield, Bumpy was the sword. It was a perfect symbiosis, or at least Bumpy thought it was. But intimacy breeds contempt. While Bumpy saw a brother, Silas saw a ceiling. Silas spent his life standing 2 steps behind the man in the spotlight. He watched Bumpy get the handshakes, the smiles from the women, the respect from the politicians. Silas got the leftovers. He got the nod. He got the envelope of cash at the end of the week, sure, but he never got the glory. The envy didn't start with a shout. It started with a whisper. It started on the cold nights standing outside the club while Bumpy held court inside. It started when Silas realized that he was taking all the risk, but Bumpy was reaping all the reward. He began to look at the back of Bumpy's neck, not with protection, but with resentment. He began to wonder what would happen if the shield simply stepped aside. He started counting the money in the bags he carried for the boss. He started doing the math. He started asking himself dangerous questions. Questions like, if I'm the one holding the gun, why am I taking the orders? Bumpy, in his brilliance, missed the rot growing in his own garden. He was too busy watching the Italians downtown. He was too busy watching the police. He forgot that the most dangerous distance in the world is the 2 feet between a king and his bodyguard. The poison entered the bloodstream on a Tuesday afternoon in Little Italy. The Genovese crime family knew they couldn't kill Bumpy Johnson in the street. They had tried. They had sent shooters. They had planted car bombs. They had tried to use the NYPD to frame him. Bumpy was too smart. He was too connected. He moved through Harlem like smoke. So the Italians changed tactics. If you can't knock down the fortress, you bribe the gatekeeper. They reached out to Silas. They didn't drag him into an alley. They invited him to a private table at a restaurant on Mulberry Street. The air smelled of roasted garlic, expensive cigars, and betrayal. The tablecloths were white and starched stiff. The wine was older than the country. 3 capos sat across from Silas. They didn't threaten him. They didn't pull weapons. They poured him a glass of Chianti and treated him like a man of respect. For the first time in his life, Silas wasn't standing behind the chair. He was sitting in it. They spoke to his ego. They told him that Bumpy Johnson was an old man. They said Bumpy was getting soft, getting careless. They told Silas that a man of his size and his talent shouldn't be a servant forever. They painted a picture of a new Harlem, a Harlem where Silas was the boss, backed by the infinite resources of the Genovese family. And then they put the money on the table. It wasn't an envelope. It was a briefcase, $50,000. In 1952, that was enough money to buy a fleet of Cadillacs, a brownstone, and a new life. It was a lifetime of wages for 5 minutes of work. The request was simple, terrifyingly simple. They didn't ask Silas to pull the trigger. They knew he couldn't do it. The bond was still too deep for direct murder. They simply asked him to be absent. They told him that on December 4th, at 2:10 a.m., 5 men would enter the lobby of the Hotel Theresa. All Silas had to do was go to the bathroom. Just walk away from the elevator bank for 3 minutes. Just look at his shoes. Just let the wolves in the door. Silas looked at the money. He looked at the Italian capos smiling at him like sharks. He thought about Bumpy trusting him with his life. He thought about the Sunday dinners. And then he thought about the years of standing in the rain. He thought about the indignity of being the shadow. He closed the briefcase. He didn't say yes. He didn't have to. The sound of the latch clicking shut was the only answer the Italians needed. The contract was signed. The price of the King of Harlem was $50,000 and 3 minutes of silence. Silas walked out of that restaurant a rich man, but he left his soul on the tablecloth between the wine stains and the breadcrumbs. He convinced himself it wasn't murder. He convinced himself he was just taking a break. But deep down, he knew. When you open the gate for the executioner, you are the one swinging the axe. The air in Harlem changed. Bumpy Johnson was a predator, and predators have a sixth sense for danger. He couldn't point to it, he couldn't prove it, but he felt the shift in the wind. The streets felt colder. The laughter in the clubs felt forced. He started noticing the small things. Silas was quiet. Too quiet. He stopped making eye contact. He stopped pouring the drinks first. He started standing a little further back, a little deeper in the dark. Bumpy tried to dismiss it. He told himself it was the pressure of the life. He told himself he was getting old, getting paranoid. This was his brother. This was the man who had pulled him out of the East River when he couldn't swim. To doubt him was to doubt himself. One night, Bumpy tested the water. He sat in his office cleaning his spectacles, looking vulnerable and small. He spoke softly to Silas. He talked about retirement. He talked about getting out of the game, maybe moving to a farm upstate. He offered Silas a way out, a chance to take a pile of cash and leave the life before the bullets found them. It was a lifeline. Bumpy was giving him a chance to confess or a chance to leave with his honor intact. Silas turned from the window. He forced a smile. It was a brittle, hollow thing. He told Bumpy he wasn't going anywhere. He said he was with him until the end. He said, "I got your back, Bumpy. Always." Bumpy put his glasses back on. He looked at the man he loved like a brother, and for the first time, he saw the lie. He saw the glaze over the eyes. He heard the rehearsed rhythm of the words. Bumpy nodded. He accepted the lie. But under his desk, his hand drifted to the drawer where he kept his razor. He knew then that the end wasn't coming from the police or the Italians. He knew the Reaper was already in the room. Betrayal never comes from your enemies. It always comes from the hand you shake. It comes from the people who know your secrets. What time is it where you are watching this? Let me know in the comments. As we move toward the night the elevator doors closed. The trap was sprung on a Thursday. The kind of Thursday that feels like a Sunday because the rain had washed the streets clean of everyone but the ghosts and the gamblers. It was 2 a.m. at the Hotel Theresa. The Waldorf of Harlem was usually a hive of activity, but tonight the hive was sleeping. The band had packed up hours ago. The last trumpet player had drained his glass and walked out into the wet Harlem night. The lobby was empty, smelling of floor wax, old brass, and the lingering perfume of the night's dancers. Bumpy Johnson was upstairs in Suite 402. He had been playing poker for 6 hours. The room was thick with smoke. He was winning as usual, but he was tired. It was a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that comes from holding up the weight of a kingdom for too long. He cashed out. He put on his cashmere coat. He said goodnight to the boys. He walked to the elevator bank on the 4th floor. He pressed the button. Down in the lobby, Silas Green was standing by the concierge desk. This was his post. This was where he was supposed to be, the immovable object standing between the world and the king. Silas checked his watch. 2:10 a.m. He looked at the revolving doors. He saw the black sedan pull up to the curb outside. The headlights cut through the rain, illuminating the falling water like diamonds. He saw 5 men get out. They didn't look like guests. They moved with purpose. Silas felt the weight of the $50,000 in his mind. He felt the phantom weight of the briefcase. He looked at the elevator indicator. The arrow was on the 4th floor. It was starting to move down. This was the moment, the crossroads. Silas didn't draw his weapon. He didn't shout a warning. He didn't run to the stairs. He turned his back. He walked away from the elevator bank. He walked toward the employee restrooms in the back of the lobby. His footsteps echoed on the marble floor. Click, click, click. Each step was a betrayal. Each step was a sentence. He told himself he just needed water. He told himself he didn't see anything, but he knew. He was leaving the gate open. He was leaving his brother to die in a steel box. As Silas disappeared around the corner, the 5 hitmen entered the lobby. They saw the empty post. They smiled. The money had been well spent. They moved to the elevator doors and waited. We returned to the box. The elevator descended. 4th floor, 3rd floor. The car stopped at the lobby. The doors opened. Bumpy saw the empty lobby. He saw the empty concierge desk where Silas was supposed to be. For a fraction of a second, confusion flickered in his mind. Then he saw the 5 men, and the confusion turned to ice. He didn't need to ask where Silas was. He knew. In the arithmetic of the underworld, absence is the loudest signal of all. If the dog isn't barking, it's because the wolf fed him a steak. The 5 men crowded in. The doors closed. The stop switch was thrown. The darkness fell. What happened in those 50 seconds is a study in controlled chaos. When the lights went out, the hitmen lost their greatest advantage: coordination. They were 5 men trying to swing weapons in a closet. They bumped into each other. They hesitated, afraid of shooting their own partners. Bumpy didn't hesitate. He didn't need to see. He knew the geography of the human body. He dropped low. He knew that in the dark, men aim for the head. He swept the leg of the nearest man, feeling the bone snap under his heel. He heard the grunt of pain. He used the falling body as a shield. A knife slashed through the air where his throat had been a second ago. Bumpy grabbed the wrist. He didn't pull away. He twisted. He used the attacker's own momentum to drive the blade into the thigh of the man standing behind him. A scream pierced the darkness. A gun went off. Boom! Deafening in the small space. The muzzle flash illuminated the carnage for a strobe light second. In that flash, Bumpy saw them. Terror. They weren't hunting a victim. They were trapped with a predator. Bumpy moved with the efficiency of a butcher. An elbow to a temple. A palm strike to a nose, driving cartilage into the brain. He didn't fight to win. He fought to end it. He turned their numbers against them, making them trip over their own fallen comrades. The car shook on its cables. The walls were splattered with blood. The air was thick with the copper smell of violence. And then, silence. Heavy, wheezing silence. Bumpy stood in the center of the pile. His chest was heaving. His knuckles were raw, but he was standing. He reached out in the dark. His fingers found the control panel. He flipped the switch. The lights buzzed back on. The scene was a grotesque tableau of failure. 5 men who had come to kill a king lay broken at his feet. Bumpy walked into his suite. He locked the door. He didn't turn on the lights. He walked to the bathroom and washed the blood off his hands. He scrubbed until the water ran clear. He looked at himself in the mirror. He didn't look like a winner. He looked like a man who had lost something he could never get back. He walked to the living room and poured a brandy. He sat in the high-backed leather chair facing the door. And he waited. 20 minutes later, there was a knock. It wasn't the police. It wasn't the Italians. It was a timid, rhythmic knock. The knock of a friend. "Bumpy, you in there? It's Silas." Bumpy didn't answer. He took a sip of the brandy. It tasted like ashes. The door handle turned. Silas had a key. He opened the door slowly, peering into the dark room. "Boss, I was downstairs. I went to the head, and when I came back, the elevator was... I heard something." Silas walked into the room. He was acting. He was trying to sell the lie. He expected to find a dead body. He expected to find the Italians celebrating. Instead, he saw Bumpy Johnson sitting in the dark, holding a snifter of brandy. Silas froze. The blood drained from his face. He looked like he had seen a ghost. Bumpy didn't shout. He didn't scream. He spoke in a voice that was barely a whisper, yet it carried the weight of a tombstone. "Close the door, Silas." Silas closed the door. His hands were shaking. "Boss, I didn't know where you were. I got worried." Bumpy swirled the brandy in the glass. "You weren't worried, Silas. You were counting." "Counting? Counting what?" $50,000. The silence that followed broke the room in half. Silas knew. He knew that Bumpy knew. There was no point in lying anymore. The lie had died in the elevator along with the 5 hitmen. Silas fell to his knees. He started to cry. He started to beg. He talked about his debts. He talked about the pressure. He talked about how tired he was of being a shadow. Bumpy listened. He listened to the man he loved like a brother confess to selling his life. When Silas was finished, Bumpy stood up. He walked over to the window and looked out at the rain-soaked streets of Harlem. "I survived, Silas. 5 men in a box. I broke them." He turned around. "But you broke me." Bumpy didn't kill him. Death was too quick. Death was a release. "Get out," Bumpy said. "Boss, please. Get out of Harlem. Get out of New York. If I see you again, if I even hear your name, the elevator doors won't open next time." Silas Green stood up. He was a rich man. He had $50,000 in a briefcase somewhere. But as he walked out of that room, he was a beggar. He had lost his name. He had lost his honor. He had lost his king. Bumpy Johnson watched the door close. He finished his brandy. He was alive. He was the victor. But as he sat alone in the dark, he realized that the Italians had succeeded in one thing. They hadn't taken his life, but they had taken his heart. The sun rose over East Harlem at 6:18 a.m. It was a pale gray dawn that offered no warmth. On Pleasant Avenue, the stronghold of the Italian mob, the Genovese capos were waiting. They sat in the back of a social club that smelled of stale espresso and avarice. They were expecting a phone call. They were expecting to hear that the king of Harlem was dead, that the Hotel Theresa was a crime scene, and that the numbers rackets were finally theirs for the taking. They checked their watches. They adjusted their silk ties. They smiled at each other, already counting the millions they would make from the heroin trade once Bumpy Johnson was out of the way. But the phone never rang. Instead, at 7 a.m., a laundry truck rattled down the street. It wasn't a truck from the neighborhood. It idled in front of the social club for a moment, the engine coughing smoke into the morning air. The back doors swung open. There were no bodies inside. There were no corpses wrapped in carpets. Bumpy Johnson didn't send dead men back. Dead men tell no tales. He sent something far worse. He sent 5 broken men. The 5 hitmen stumbled out of the truck onto the pavement. They were unrecognizable. Swollen eyes, broken jaws, arms hanging at unnatural angles. They were stripped of their weapons, their wallets, and their dignity. They collapsed on the sidewalk in a heap of moaning, terrified humanity. The Italians watched from the window. The smiles vanished. The espresso turned bitter in their mouths. They realized instantly what had happened. Bumpy hadn't used a gun. He hadn't ambushed them from a rooftop. He had taken their best men, trapped them in a box, and dismantled them with his bare hands. Attached to the lapel of the lead hitman was a note. It wasn't typed. It was handwritten in elegant cursive script. It read, "Next time, send men, not boys, and send them to the penthouse. I hate waiting in the lobby." The message was clearer than a gunshot. Bumpy Johnson wasn't just defending Harlem, he was mocking them. He was telling them that their violence was amateur hour. He was telling them that he was untouchable. For the next 10 years, the Genovese family did not cross 110th Street. They didn't retreat because of a peace treaty. They retreated because of fear. They looked at the broken men on the sidewalk and realized that you cannot fight a ghost who fights back. The elevator at the Hotel Theresa is still there. If you go to Harlem today, you can stand in the lobby. You can press the button. You can watch the brass doors slide shut. It takes exactly 50 seconds to get from the lobby to the top floor. Try it sometime. Stand in that box, close your eyes, listen to the hum of the motor, imagine the lights going out, imagine the air turning thick with the smell of sweat and blood. We like to believe that history is made by armies and treaties. We like to believe that power is shifted by elections and laws. But the truth, the gritty noir truth, is that history often pivots on a single moment of violence in a dark room. If Bumpy Johnson dies in that elevator, Harlem falls. The numbers game collapses. The community loses its bank. The drug trade floods the streets 10 years earlier. The entire cultural landscape of Black America in the 1950s changes. But he didn't die. He adjusted his tie. He walked out. However, survival has a cost. The Bumpy Johnson who walked out of that elevator wasn't the same man who walked in. The professor left a piece of his soul on that mahogany floor. He became colder. He became harder. He never again trusted a bodyguard to watch his back. He never again let his guard down, not even for a second. He realized that the only person he could truly rely on was the man in the mirror. Silas Green, the man who sold his brother for a briefcase, disappeared into the wind. Rumor has it he died alone in a flophouse in Chicago, clutching a rosary, afraid of the dark. He learned the hard way that $50,000 can buy a lot of things, but it can't buy sleep. And Bumpy? Bumpy ruled until the day he died. He sat on his throne, surrounded by people, but utterly alone. He was the king of Harlem, the Godfather, the survivor. But every time he stepped into an elevator, every time those doors slid shut, he must have felt the ghost of that Tuesday night. The click of the latch, the hum of the motor, the darkness. We are all trapped in boxes of our own making. Some of us are trapped by greed, like Silas. Some of us are trapped by ambition, like the Italians. And some of us are trapped by the very power we fought so hard to keep. If you are watching this, ask yourself, when the lights go out and the doors lock, who are you? Are you the victim, or are you the beast? If you enjoyed this deep dive into the shadows of Harlem, hit that subscribe button. We are digging up the files that the FBI tried to burn. Where are you watching from tonight? Is it raining there? Let me know in the comments, and tell me, if you were Bumpy, would you have let Silas live? I'm reading every response. Keep your head on a swivel, watch the doors. This is Untold Mafia Stories. We'll see you on the next floor.